Chapter 1. 'Tis the Season to be Jolly. December 25th was right around the corner, actually 12 days away, and I was so excited. Christmas is my absolute favorite time of the year, always has been, and I really don't think my feelings have changed much in relation to that since I was a child. I admit that while growing up, my home environment was not very conducive to the Christmas season, neither to any other holiday for that matter. Mom didn't exactly go out of her way to make the occasion a special one for me. She had more important things to think of, such as herself. I only realized how special Christmas was when I noticed other families in my neighborhood making a big deal out of it, especially with the display of a Christmas tree, no matter how beautiful or disgraceful it looked. The point is that they had one. Many of them took great pains in decorating their tree, and some succeeded at it, in my humble opinion, and others failed miserably. Nevertheless, it didn't matter one iota how the tree looked at the end of the day. What mattered was the joy that surrounded it and permeated the air. And I perceived that it wasn't about the tree at all, but about the positive emotions that Christmas evoked. From the gift-giving and charity that went out the door for some people the other 364 days of the year, to the lovely decorations on homes and street corners, even on business establishments. Mom didn't bother to change a thing about our house when the holiday came around. Not because she wasn't Christian, but because she said it was all a huge marketing campaign by big and small store owners alike. She might have been right, and years later I certainly understood her sentiments in that regard. But since she wasn't religiously opposed to it, I felt she could have made Christmas a special time for me since other kids got to enjoy it. Okay, I realize it isn't about me at all, that there's a deeper meaning to Christmas that has to do with Christ, and trust me, I'm not trying to take that away from him at all. I'm just speaking of it from the eyes and heart of a child who felt something unique around that time of year, but who never even got a Christmas gift from my mom. Thankfully, my Uncle Stan brought a present to our house for me every couple of years. He was the only relative who seemed to care that I was the only kid on our block who didn't get to open any gifts for Christmas, other than the Jehovah's Witnesses down the street from me. One Christmas morning when I was 11 years old, I walked across the street to my friend Cynthia Snyder's house. Her folks were the overly affectionate type, who were annoyingly touchy and feely with everyone they came into contact with. Mr. Snyder usually pinched my ear and nose whenever I showed up and got a kick out of how I frowned about it. He never pinched hard at all. It was just his way of playing with neighborhood kids. And Mrs. Snyder always had a jolly smile on her face, like she was Mrs. Claus or something. The woman never seemed to have a bad day. Cynthia was a lot like her mother. She was a happy-go-lucky girl who didn't have a care in the world. None of us were well off by any means, far from it. But the people in my neighborhood generally knew how to be happy with the little that they had. The Snyder's house was the best decorated on our street. Cynthia's parents owned a little shop attached to their home, which was the main thing that kept their heads above water financially. What surprised me that day all those years ago was that they actually had a gift under the tree for me. Cynthia said she'd told her parents that my mom didn't celebrate Christmas and I never got presents, so they felt badly for me and told Cynthia to invite me over on Christmas morning. Mom barely spoke a word to them. She pretty much kept to herself and her occasional whiskey. I think they felt sorry for me because every Christmas after that, until they moved away 4 years later, they'd brought Christmas gifts for me. I would show the presents to Mom, but she didn't care either way. When Cynthia's dad finally completed 10 years of college part-time and got his degree, he took a job across town at a marketing firm and moved the family into a better neighborhood. I was sad when they left and figured they wouldn't be mailing any presents my way, so when I turned 16, I got my first job at a diner downtown after school, started saving my money, and every Christmas after that, I made it special for me. I purchased us our first Christmas tree and put up some decorations and twinkling lights on our front porch. Mom argued with me that extra lights on the house meant a higher power bill, but I won the argument when I reminded her that I was working and actually paying some of the bills now. I also bought and wrapped a couple of gifts for Mom and a few for myself. She was quite resistant over all the decorating fuss I was making, But you should have seen the look on her face when I handed her those gifts that year. Her face immediately softened, and I could swear I glimpsed a smile. My mother rarely ever smiled, and maybe she didn't have very much to smile about since life hadn't been very kind to her. But had it not been for the Snyders, who had their struggles and challenges and still knew how to give the gift of love to others, I might have ended up just like my mom, lonely, bitter, and angry at the world. Strangers never know the hidden power of a kind gesture. "Hey, you almost knocked me off the ladder!" Anthony yelled after I mistakenly bumped into it in the living room. "What are you doing up there?" I asked. "I'm hanging some decorations like I did last year and the year before that," he said. "I forgot to tell you that I was going up." That would have been nice since he knew I was legally blind. "No worries. Thankfully, I didn't bump a lot harder to cause you to fall," I replied. "I'm sure for Theodore, if he were here, that would have been a funny sight to see. Not to mention, you might have gotten hurt." Anthony shook his head. "Funny how you left mentioning the possibility of me getting hurt for last." "You know I love you, Anthony. I wouldn't want you injured. Besides, who'd take care of the decorating if you don't?" "I know he's not necessarily viewed as backup when it comes to things like this," he said, "but Theodore can easily take over. And that's just like saying Nilla will take over." I continued on to the kitchen. My darling Nilla was in the TV room under the couch, scratching at something that had always managed to evade my inner sight. I could never make out what it was she was getting at, and neither could the boys. Theodore had even pulled out the chair from against the wall one day so that he could inspect it with no luck. There was nothing apparent that could have attracted Nilla's interest so intently, other than the leg of the couch that had scratches on it. Maybe she sensed termites, but we hadn't found any evidence of the critters. Anthony always did a splendid job readying the house for Christmas, and as a now sought-after interior decorator in our town, he made sure to regularly add photos to his already impressive online catalog. "By the way, is Darla coming to the Christmas party?" I yelled to him from the kitchen. "You two have gotten quite close in recent months." "We're just friends, Lucille," he answered. "And yes, I invited her." "Yay? What are you yaying for?" "I said we're just friends." "That's what you say, but that's not what's traveling through the grapevine." He hung his last Christmas snowflake swirl, descended the ladder, then stood in the doorway of the kitchen. "Really? What, pray tell, is traveling through this godforsaken town's grapevine?" he asked with arms folded. I poured out my glass of milk. "The talk is that Darla is quite smitten with you. She's telling people that you're the best thing she's come across since sliced turkey." Anthony laughed. "She said that, huh?" "Yes, and used those exact words too, according to what I've heard. She must really love sliced turkey." "Lucille, I don't know who you're out there talking to. Never mind, I do. Merlene and Carla and everyone else who have nothing better to do than gossip, apparently. But I'll have you know that your information is not true." "Why would you say a thing like that?" I asked before taking a gulp of my milk. "Not about Merlene and Carla, because we both know those two need a life, but about your relationship with Darla. Are you saying the little girl isn't in love with you?" "There's no relationship. That's what I'm saying," he replied. "And she isn't a little girl, as you put it, Lucille. The woman's 29 years old. These feelings of love you and your friends have gossiped about is news to me. If Darla felt that way, I'm sure I wouldn't have been the last to know. And even if she feels that way, it doesn't mean the feeling is mutual." I rested my glass on the counter. "Are you saying that you don't have any romantic feelings at all for the little girl?" He sighed. "Would you please stop referring to her as that? If you mention something like that using those terms in front of someone who has no idea who you're referring to, they'd probably think I'm a pedophile or something." "Okay, let me correct myself," I replied. "Are you saying that you don't have any romantic feelings at all for Darla?" "That's better," he sighed. "And yes, that's what I'm saying." "I don't believe you." He seemed shocked by the reply. "Why not?" "Because you talk about her all the time and you clearly seemed quite interested when you first mentioned you'd met her. That's why. I remember when I met Donnie. He was all I ever talked about. Everything was Donnie this or Donnie that. Thoughts of him consumed me, and you're just like that with Darla. Why wouldn't you admit it, Anthony? What are you running from?" He shrugged. You know, if I hadn't known better, I would have been convinced of this undying love fable myself. Seems you've got it all figured out, and I'm the last to know about it. FYI, I'm not running from anything. Can't a male and female be close friends with no romantic involvement these days? Just because I talk about her a lot doesn't mean I want to marry her or anything. Over the past few months, I realize we have some things in common. Of course, being rich like she is isn't one of them, but we share similar interests when it comes to art and design, political views, and other things. Ah, that's so sweet, I smiled. What? The mere excitement in your voice when you talk about your shared interests, I said. I'm sure you're in denial and will wake up sooner or later and embrace your true feelings. In the meantime, I'm going upstairs to get dressed. Where are you going? Carla's coming to take me to do some Christmas shopping. I still have to figure out what to get for Theodore. I'm sure a woman for him would be at the top of your list, he smirked. Anthony. He stepped aside as I proceeded out of the kitchen. Psst. You sound traumatized by our conversation involving the little girl. Don't you worry. You'll get in touch with those feelings of yours, like I said. He shook his head and proceeded to take the ladder outside while I headed up to my bedroom.